What did the ancient Greeks use as small change? We might be familiar with the visually impressive silver tetradrachma struck by the different Greek city-states, and one might mistakenly assume these coins were very common in their marketplaces, and that would not really be true. These were important sums of money, meant to pay salaries or as storages of wealth. What most Greeks would have used in their daily lives were small silver and bronze fractional coins. These coins receive less attention than they should from collectors. They're much more common than larger denominations. Of course, they're much more affordable, easier to collect. And if you're like me and you wonder where have your coins been to back when they were money, these were the coins that were exchanging hands all day long in the ancient Agora. Your large fancy tetradrachma most likely spent the majority of its time safely stashed away at a jar or in the local temple's treasury. But these little coins, they were going back and forth all day long. So today, the stars of the show are these small fractional coins, the pocket change from ancient Greece. What did it look like? Why were they so tiny? What kind of real value did these coins have? Let's find out. The first thing we need to understand is that the concept of small change, of coins of small denominational value, did not appear alongside the very first coins. The first coins, struck roughly between the 650s, 600s BC in the kingdom of Lydia, were made out of a mix of gold and silver. And although small fractional pieces of these coins existed, some of them weighed just 0.3 grams, they were tiny, they were still a respectable amount of money, considering how expensive precious metals were at the time, particularly the gold that was mixed in. Such small coins could be worth 3 days of work. Good luck trying to buy your daily groceries with that much money. It is likely that in these earlier stages of monetary history, society wasn't fully monetized, with coined money being used just in important transactions of rich merchants as salaries for mercenaries, soldiers, or public officials. Everyday transactions most likely continued using commodity money, the barter of goods, local credit systems, and the exchange of metals for its intrinsic value, meaning its weight dictated its value, not a face value determined by a issuing state like a coin had. Only around a century later, so the 550s BC, with the development of pure silver and gold coins, that fractional silver coins became a practical medium of low-level exchange. At around this time, we see the adoption of coinage by the Greek world. They really liked the concept developed by the Lydians, and coins were quickly adopted by most Greek city-states. A series of different weight standards appeared in different regions, but in very broad strokes, these systems were based on a silver unit, a drachma. There were multiples of the drachma, which is not the focus of today, and there were fractions. A drachma was divisible into 6 fractions, called obols. Each obol in turn was divisible in 4 fractions, called tetartemorion, an agglutination of the words tetarton, meaning a quarter, and morion, meaning a portion. To make change even smaller, and since silver was so valuable, even a tiny slither of silver had value, some cities divided the obol into 8 parts, with an 8 being an hemitetartemorion, literally meaning half of a quarter of a part. And these were really tiny coins. If the fractional unit, the obol, weighed less than a gram, roughly 0.72 grams, imagine how tiny a hemitetartemorion would be then. Despite their small size, they did have real purchasing power. As an example, in ancient Athens, between the 5th and the 4th centuries BC, an obol could rent you the services of an unskilled slave for a day. A hemi-obol could get you a bowl of barley porridge, maybe with a drizzle of honey on top, so a nice healthy breakfast. And a tetartemorion couldn't really get you much. You could buy the equivalent of maybe a pint of ordinary wine at an affordable tavern. Well, a whole pint of wine for less than a tenth of a gram of silver actually doesn't sound like a bad deal. So, as I said, these coins were absolutely tiny. These would have been a nightmare to manufacture in the correct weight. It would have been hard to differentiate one denomination from the other. It would have been very easy to lose them, and I'm actually pretty sure lots of these coins must have reached our days simply because some Greek guy dropped the damn thing on a field and couldn't find it. So why did they bother making such small coins? Couldn't they just make a larger, more practical coin in bronze or some cheap metal? Maybe a copper-silver mix? Well, technically they could, but during the archaic and classical periods, there was a widespread mistrust of bronze as a monetary metal. Silver was silver. It was precious, universally accepted, and city-states did not trust each other. So the idea of accepting a coin without precious metal content was simply not something the Greeks were willing to tolerate. Nowadays we're used to our money being purely fiduciary, meaning the value of our coins isn't in the metal itself, but in the ability of modern governments to forcibly impose the use of this money. Throughout history, the stronger and the more authoritarian a government was, the more capable it was to impose coins with no intrinsic value. But by that time, it was just not something the city-states could impose. People would just refuse the coins. This would eventually change, but I'll get there when I get there. So with this quick introduction of our tiny coins concluded, we should start looking at some examples. Let's begin with a piece from Ephesus in the region of Ionia, dated between 550 and 500 BC. This little thing here weighs just 0.2 grams, so this is either a tetartemorion, a quarter of an obol, or 1/48th of a stater. This coin is so old, so early. It might have been struck with the older weight standard established by Croesus, the first Lydian king to strike coins of pure gold and pure silver, which was eventually copied by the Greeks and adapted into their own weight standards. On the obverse, we have an adorable little bee, the symbol of the city. Bees represented the goddess Artemis, the patron goddess of Ephesus, and it was depicted on coins of this city all the way into the Roman period, many centuries later. On the reverse, we have an incu sponge, very typical of archaic coins, meant to represent the coin was made out of good metal all the way to its core, instead of being a plated forgery. Who would want to take the time to fake such a tiny low-value coin though? That eludes me. Next, let's look at a piece from the city of Teos, another city in Ionia, quite close to Ephesus. This tetartemorion was made a bit later, so between 478 and 449 BC roughly. I'm glad the people of the mint decided to spread out the 0.2 grams of silver as much as possible, because we can actually see a full design on the obverse. There's a lot of detail for such a small coin. We can see the head of a griffin, a mythological animal, angrily opening its beak. On the reverse, we have a remnant of the archaic style of coinage. We still have an incu sponge, although in this case it isn't really a punch. It's more like a square design that is meant to simulate the incu sponge. It is subdivided into 4 smaller squares, and each square has some tiny visual elements in them, which honestly I can't figure out what they are. Maybe they're meant to represent flowers, stars, or they're just little pellets to fill out the design. Our third coin is very special. This is a hemiobol from Athens. Yeah, Athens did not only strike those big, wonderful silver tetradrachma of over 17 grams. In fact, the big tetradrachma was mostly a coin made for export, so Athens could purchase the food and the goods it needed to support its very big urban population in an area where agriculture was quite difficult and definitely not able to support such a population. The vast majority of the coins you would have found in the Agora, the actual marketplace, would have been things like that. small fractions, and they had the exact same design as its bigger, famous cousin. On the obverse, we have the bust of the goddess Athena, but due to the small size, this coin just weighs 0.36 grams, the majority of Athena's head is actually off the flan. We can see the top part of her helmet and the 3 little olive leaves that decorate the side of the helmet. The reverse is wonderful. Look at that teeny tiny little owl. There's something very charming about seeing a miniature version of the big tetradrachma, especially when it is depicted with so much attention to detail. It's all here. The olive branch on the top left, symbolizing the gift Athena gave to the city of Athens, the first olive tree. To the right, the letters Alpha, Theta, Epsilon, an abbreviation to Athenaion of the Athenians, and, of course, the very well-detailed owl at the center of the design. It's all just lovely. I'm jealous of Matt, the owner of this coin. I want to get one of these fractions for my own collection one day. Alright, let's keep going. Let's look at another hemi-obol. This one comes from Cyzicus, dated around 450 and 400 BC. I would say this denomination is at the limit of what could be considered pocket change. An obol, the typical fraction of the drachma, was already a respectable amount of money, and generally the obol and the hemi-obol are much more common than the smaller fractions, so it's likely that they were much more useful pieces of currency. That's why they were made in larger numbers. You needed multiples of the smallest pieces to realistically purchase anything. Cyzicus was a prosperous and important city in what is today Western Turkey, and it issued tons of these fractions featuring on the obverse a charming little boar. Pigs were associated with the goddess Demeter, the goddess of harvest and agriculture. So despite our boar here looking kinda clumsy and chubby, they had a pretty important religious significance. To its right, like standing upright, we have a tunnyfish, the symbol for the city of Cyzicus itself. The reverse presents us with a left-facing head of a lion, and to its left we have a star with 5 points. The Greeks associated the lion to power, majesty, just like we do today, and lions could actually be found on the wild all over the Mediterranean up until at least the 1st century AD, when they were either hunted down to extinction or changes in the climate patterns pushed them down towards Africa. Moving on, we have a bronze coin. But wait, didn't I just tell you the Greeks were very suspicious of bronze as money? Yes, that is correct. But sometimes certain events happen that change the course of history, and one of those events was the Peloponnesian War, fought between Athens and Sparta between 431 and 404 BC. The war wasn't restricted to just these 2 cities, but their entire circle of influence. Eventually, the conflict involved all of mainland Greece, all islands of the Aegean Sea, and the western coast of Anatolia. Basically, all of the classical Greek world was, at a certain moment, at war. Most silver was directed to the war effort. The hiring of armies and mercenaries, the reinforcement of garrisons, the building of ships, and one of the ways the Greeks found to squeeze as much silver as possible to the war was to stop issuing small denominations in silver. Anything smaller than an obol generally was confined to local trade. So what the city-states did was to begin striking these smaller denominations in bronze, coins without any intrinsic value. They had purely fiduciary value and generally were only valued either in their issuing cities or in the surrounding areas at most. This gave the elites of the city the freedom to pay for less important expenditures in bronze. Think about the wages of public workers hired by the polis, any local state expenses, and this freed up silver to be used in the war. The name of these new coins was halkos, or its plural, halkoi, meaning bronze for the material the coin was made out of. The obol, that was originally divided into 8 hemitetartemorion, was now divided into 8 halkoi, So one hemi-oboe would have been 4 halkos or tetrachalkoi. A 2 halkoi coin was a dihalkoi, etc. What we have here is most likely a single halkos, struck at the city of Pitane, between the 4th and the 3rd centuries BC. It's quite small as well, just 2 grams. Even if this was meant to be a hemi-tetartemorion, so the equivalent of 0.1 grams of silver, 2 grams of bronze was not nearly as valuable as 0.1 grams of precious metal. So this is absolutely a coin of pure fiduciary value. If it had 10, 15 grams of bronze, then we could consider it to have some sort of intrinsic value in its bronze, but only 2 grams? No way, this is fully fiduciary. On the obverse we have a really nice image of Zeus, the king of the gods. Notice he has horns coming out of his head. Horns were a symbol of the divine, and it's not uncommon to find images of horned gods, not only Zeus. On the reverse we have a star, and between each of the star's arms we have the letters of the name of the city, Pitane, spelled out. What a lovely little coin. And we keep going forward in time to the 4th century BC. The striking of smaller denominations in base metals will be normalized. Here we have a coin struck under Alexander the Great. Alexander adopted the Athenian standard, called the Attic standard, and he imposed the system on his huge empire. So, in the system, every coin smaller than an oboe was to be issued in bronze, and the authority of striking these small coins was relegated to local civic authorities, with silver being reserved to royal mints under his direct control. This particular example here is from the city of Miletus, and it's most likely a quarter of an oboe. I love this design, it's so smart. They made the obverse slightly convex, making it a miniature shield. Anyone back then who saw Alexander in battle with his unbeatable phalanx would have immediately recognized this round shield. There are lots of different designs made by different mints, and in the case of Miletus here, we have a very simple, circular design with semicircles around the central shield boss. On the reverse, we have a crested helmet, another common sight in Alexander's armies. Notice the helmet has this big crest on top, which made its wearer look substantially taller. And at the bottom, there are a couple of cheek pieces to protect the soldier's face during battle. These coins also have a series of control marks to indicate the magistrates responsible for its production and the mint. In the case of Miletus here, under the cheek pieces, the issue is identified by the image of a little wheat stalk. Shortly after Alexander's early and sudden death, his generals carved out his kingdom amongst themselves, with most maintaining the monetary standard intact. They just changed the imagery on the coins to pass their own personal propaganda. Here, for example, we have Cassander. He became king of Macedon after disposing of Alexander's youngest son, Alexander IV. This piece is dated between 305 and 298 BC, and since it weighs around twice as much as the previous coin, in this case 6.7 grams, it is most likely a hemi-oboe, the largest bronze denomination. If you got 2 of these, you could exchange it for a silver coin. On the obverse, we have another kind of helmet. This one looks quite different. Very tactful approach on the part of Cassander. This is a Chalcidian helmet, a type of helmet commonly used in Macedonia and southern Greece, so a design easily recognizable in the territories he ruled over and where this coin would typically circulate. The reverse is simple and straight to the point. We have the tip of a spear, and at the top it reads Basileus, and on the bottom, Cassandro, Basileus Cassandro, of King Cassander. The level of detail on the spear tip is remarkable. We can see at its base that it is hollow, there's a little hole. These were called socketed spear tips, so at one end of the shaft was connected to this tip just by sticking it through that opening. The blade is shaped like a leaf, giving this type of spear its name, a leaf tip socketed spear. Really cool. The monetary systems established by the Greeks were so well accepted in the Eastern Mediterranean that when the Romans arrived, they mostly kept the monetary system as they found it, with denominations such as drachma, obols, hemi-obols continuing to be made in the Greek world well into the Roman imperial period. The very last Greek fractional coins stopped being made with Diocletian's monetary reforms in the late 3rd century AD. And there we have it. Did you learn something new today? I hope you did. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like and subscribing so you get notified when new episodes are released. Now it's your turn. Which is your favorite piece of ancient Greek small change? Let us know in the comment section below. Happy collecting, and I'll see you soon.